It's the Farmer to Farmer podcast, episode 82, and this is your host, Chris Blanchard. Paul Underhill is a partner in Terra Firma Farm, where he manages crop production on 220 acres in the southern Sacramento Valley. Terra Firma Farm raises certified organic vegetables year-round, as well as fruits and nuts, which they sell through a 1,200-member CSA in Sacramento, Davis, and San Francisco, as well as through retailers, wholesalers, and restaurant accounts. Paul gives us a look into operating at scale, including the logistics of a 1,000-member CSA. We also get a peek into the equipment he's found useful at this scale, including a relatively inexpensive GPS system, multiple bed equipment, and low-tech harvest tools. Terra Firma Farm has been around since the 1980s, and Paul tells us about the many changes to California's food and agriculture scene, and the impact those have had on Terra Firma's employment practices, equipment acquisition opportunities, CSA program, and food safety practices. Paul also shares the story of how he became a partner at Terra Firma Farm and how they make their partnership work. It was great to have Paul on the show. I hope you enjoy this episode just as much as I enjoyed making it for you. Farmer to Farmer podcast is made possible with the generous support of Vermont Compost Company, founded by organic crop growing professionals committed to meeting the need for high quality compost and compost-based living soil mixes for certified organic plant production. VermontCompost.com. This episode of the Farmer to Farmer podcast is brought to you by BCS America. BCS two-wheel tractors are versatile, maneuverable in tight spaces, lightweight for less compaction, and easy to maintain and repair on the farm. Gear-driven and built to last for decades of dependable service. BCSAmerica.com. Paul Underhill, welcome to the Farmer to Farmer podcast.
Glad to be here, Chris. Thank you.
I think it'd be great if we could start off by having you tell us about Terra Firma Farm. Just give us the lay of the land there.
All right. Terra Firma farms 220 acres of all certified organic land in Yolo and Solano counties, which is in the southern Sacramento Valley or the northern part of California Central Valley. We're 70 miles northeast of San Francisco and 30 miles northwest of Sacramento. It's a year-round farming area that's hot and dry in the summer and cool and wet in the winter normally. Although we've had a drought for a couple of years, back. The principal crops growing around us are almonds, walnuts, canning tomatoes, and wine grapes. Our area is some people consider it sort of a hotbed of organic CSA vegetable farming, but we're a tiny percent of the overall farm economy in the area. We grow vegetables year-round here, as well as asparagus, strawberries, table grapes, stone fruit, citrus, walnuts, and pistachios. We have persimmons, figs, and Asian pears as well. And it's not all in one location. Our fields are spread over about a 10-mile area. We have different soils and different microclimates, all coming down from the Coast Range along our water source, which is Puda Creek. So we deliver 900 plus CSA boxes every week to the San Francisco Bay Area, Sacramento, and Davis. And we also sell to retailers, wholesalers, and restaurants in all of those areas. We have two 24-foot refrigerated box trucks that are on the road going one direction or the other every day except Monday, most of the year. Our CSA peaked back in 2008, right at the start of the recession, at about 1,300 members, and it's dropped down over the last several years to where it is now. We have 80 or a few more employees in the summertime on the farm, and just over 50 in the winter. I have two partners. My partner Paul Holmes started the farm back in 1988, and I started working for him in 1993, and I guess we'll probably get into that a little bit more later. But and then Hector Melendez, who was also an employee of the farm when I started working at the farm as well. A big chunk of Hector's family works for our farm. His wife, his brother, sister-in-law. His son is a delivery driver, and his daughter works in our office when she's home from college in the summertime, and several of his cousins. His mom and dad worked for us for a long time, but recently retired. We have numerous employees that have been with us for 10 years or more. An example is we had a harvest manager who worked for us for 10 years, had to leave in 2003, but his son started working for us just last year, sort of continuing the family connection there.
With 80 employees in the summertime, where are you getting a labor crew like that?
Our farm is largely Spanish speaking, We are a year-round employer for most of our employees, and most of our employees live in the surrounding area, either in winters or there's a few towns that are 10, 12 miles away. Our crew, people have, our farm is like a regular workplace. People come to work every day. They have a job that they do every day. The work they're doing changes over the course of the year, depending on, what the crops are and what the tasks are. But for example, we have two guys who all they do is irrigation. There are irrigation specialists. We have three people who just drive tractor all day long, every day. We have a large packing crew that's dedicated to packing in this late winter and spring. When we don't have tons to harvest, they'll come out to the field to help us with hoeing or help us out with strawberry harvest which is our first big crop in the spring with strawberries. But mostly we get our employees from referrals from other employees. We have a lot of family members on the farm, not just Hector's family that I mentioned earlier, but somebody comes to work at the farm, they like it here, they tell their brother or their sister or their cousins, and that's how over the years, how we've gotten our crew. In the summertime, when it's busy, we do work with a farm labor contractor that provides us with seasonal people who will work for us for 2, 3, 4 months. In the summertime, it's gotten a lot harder to find seasonal labor in this area. A lot of the hand labor crops have gone away in the last 4 or 5 years, been replaced by almonds in particular and walnuts, which are almost entirely mechanically farmed. And so people have gone to other places in the state, and so it has become more of a challenge. That makes it more important for us to provide year-round work for as many people as possible. And that is kind of what drove us to go to a year-round farming, a year-round CSA was trying to provide year-round employment for people. Is
most of the agriculture in your area year-round?
No, the primary season here is the dry season. So the row crop, the equivalent of corn and soybeans in the Midwest is processing tomatoes, believe it or not, which are harvested mechanically. Hundreds of acres of, in our county, thousands of acres of processing tomatoes are grown. And it's also a big area for sunflowers for seed, which is sold. Seed companies contract with people to grow sunflowers for seed. That's a rotation crop for the processing tomato guys. And then nut crops are they're deciduous trees. They're dormant in the wintertime. The work on those orchards starts in the springtime when they start to leaf out, and the harvest is in the fall.
When you talk about getting employees through referrals from employees that you already have, I mean, you said you're a Spanish-speaking farm. Are people already living in the United States, or are you having to interface with the immigration services and try to help people get across the border?
No, we don't. We don't get that involved in the process. If you have a large seasonal labor demand, like you have a cherry or you grow cherries or something, and you need 400 people for a month, that's where people get into working with the H-2A. But no, we're just recruiting locally, people who live in the area. We get a certain amount of high school kids with work visas in the summertime. So, their parents or uncles or aunts might work for us, and they're 16, 17, and they're looking for summer work. So we always get a small crew of high school kids in the summertime. But again, it's those kids all speak English. Obviously, they're going to school here, but if their parents speak English, it's not their preferred language. We the language that we speak in the fields here is Spanish all day long.
So you're fluent in Spanish?
I am, yeah.
With that many employees, you must have multiple layers of management. You're not you're the partners in the farm, the three of you aren't directly telling each person on the farm what to do and making sure that they're doing it the way that you want it done.
Yeah, obviously. We have the management of our farm kind of split in three in on the partnership level. So my job, I'm the production manager is my job on the farm. So I manage everything up until harvest. My partner Paul Holmes manages the daily harvest, and we have a harvest manager who works for him, who actually manages the harvest crew. So he's coordinating orders, figuring out how much crop we have in the field, what percentage is going in the CSA boxes, what needs to get sold, all that kind of stuff. And then Hector runs our packing shed, which is, obviously for any farm, it's a big chunk of the work. But on our farm, we have almost as many people in the packing shed as we do in the field. We're bagging up items for CSA boxes, 900 bags of whatever it is, green beans or potatoes, and then packing the CSA boxes. And then we're also doing quality control on that stuff, and then also on the packing that we do for restaurants and stores and wholesalers. And then as far as middle management goes, then we do, then below the partnership level, we have people managing crews. We have crew leaders. We have, like I mentioned, our harvest manager kind of directs traffic, who's going where, who's doing what. We have multiple locations. We have crops at different ranches all the time. So we'll have, on a this time of year, like we'll have a small crew in doing peaches or picking grapes. Then we have a big crew doing tomatoes, which is our main cash crop in the summertime. And, a smaller crew will be picking cucumbers and summer squash. So we have a crew leader for each of those crews.
You're spread over a 10-mile area. How are you moving crews to those locations and produce back from those locations?
So that, we try to move people around as little as possible on a daily basis. So a crew will be working at one ranch for at least half the day, and then at lunchtime they might hop in their cars and drive to a different location to work for the afternoon. We have field trucks that go between the fields. This time of year, we actually have 3 different trucks that are moving crop. Some of them are refrigerated, some are just flatbeds that go by each field where we're harvesting and pick up stuff and bring it back to our packing shed. Our packing shed is actually not on any of the other parcels that we farm. It's a large warehouse facility that is smack in the middle of all of our fields, sort of equidistant, and so it's a constant flow of product going into the packing shed over the course of the day. And we try not to, especially this time of year, we try not to have anything sitting out for very long, anything more than an hour and a half or so. If we do have a lot of stuff in one location, we'll have a refrigerated truck there that the product is being stored in, and then the driver will show up with another truck and take the truck that's loaded back to the packing shed. So, yeah, it's a fairly complex operation that we have.
And what does a packing shed look like for 200 acres of vegetables, fruits, and nuts in California?
Well, we really kind of scored. We're renting. This is a facility that a neighbor of ours built. It didn't have any cold storage at it. We had to add the cold storage. We added 4 refrigerated trailers that we sort of nestled in between the warehouse buildings. But it's not air conditioned, but it's a swamp cooled. It's a very large, I don't remember the square footage off the top of my head, but it's a big building. You can stack bins in there, 6 high, so 24 feet high, And we do that. We also use that as, we store onions, garlic, winter squash, sweet potatoes in that warehouse because it's not refrigerated. So you don't want to have things that need to actually be cooled in there, but it's a nice facility. We got inspected by OSHA a few years back, and they were real concerned about, the heat. And the OSHA inspector walked into the building, and she was just like, "This is a really nice place to work," So it's plenty of space for us to store stuff. But then we also have, sorting tables, and we have a CSA packing line. It's just a roller conveyor that the boxes are rolled along, and people, have their stations, and they're putting the items into the boxes as the boxes go by. We have forklifts, a couple forklifts there. So everything's unloaded by forklift, and there's quite a bit of concrete. Everything is either forklifted or pallet jacked around, and we can pull stuff in and out of the coolers with a pallet jack or with a forklift. It makes the work a lot more manageable. And then we have our refrigerated trucks that we actually load our trucks. We pack and load into our trucks at the end of the day. So once the stuff is packed and the pallets are organized, the CSA pallets or the store pallets, they go straight into the delivery trucks, which are plugged in. And so, we can put the cool produce into the cool truck, and it stays there overnight, and the drivers come in early in the morning and jump in the trucks, and away they go.
So you guys are managing your own logistics for doing deliveries.
Yep.
How many trucks are you guys managing, and how many delivery days are you running those for?
So we're on the road 6 days a week this time of year. We have 2 trucks every day, 2 full-time drivers. Tuesday through Saturday, we have 2 trucks on the road, and Sunday it's usually just 1 truck. But going one direction or the other, depending. Some days 1 truck goes to Sacramento, 1 goes to San Francisco. Some days they both go to San Francisco. Some days, I think only 1 day of the week, they both go to Sacramento. And
then I noticed on your website, you guys are doing home delivery in San Francisco.
We outsourced that.
Okay.
We looked at it over the years, and, I talked to some other farmers to try to figure out, could we organize, something down there in the Bay Area, a small warehouse with some fans. Nobody was interested in doing that. And then just last year, I believe, this company in San Francisco approached us about doing it, and so we work with them. It's integrated into the way we do our CSA ordering, but we don't actually deliver. We deliver the boxes to them first thing in the morning, and then they deliver them to our subscribers, and it costs the subscribers $6, which is less than it would cost for us to do it. The trucks that we're driving are pretty full, and we do 3 different sizes of CSA box: a small, medium, and large size. And the way that we do it is we don't label the boxes as they're going into the truck. The driver labels them as they come out. We put a label with the person's name on it. That because there's 3 different size boxes in the truck, the driver's got kind of a job at each drop site to get X number of medium boxes, X number of large boxes, X number of small boxes. And if the pallets were pre-organized, it would be a nightmare, an organizational nightmare in our packing shed. You'd have to have some sort of crazy schematic diagram that some poor person would have to try to follow, on the ground in the packing shed. So I've never seen the logic in doing that. So we're outsourcing the home delivery.
Yeah. Not to mention, I worked for UPS during the Christmas rush one time out in Seattle back in the mid 1990s, and 200 deliveries was a big day.
Oh, yeah.
For 2 people working in the truck. And we would cover an area that was maybe 2 miles on a side for that. So trying to do home delivery across the city, I can't imagine.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we have 25 drop sites just in San Francisco. That's over, we do 2 delivery routes in San Francisco on Thursday and 1 on Wednesday. So that's, over the 3 delivery routes. But yeah, you're basically at each drop site for, if you're done in half an hour you're cruising, because some of our job sites, it's, again, our CSA has shrunk considerably, but back in the day, we had a job site where you were unloading almost 50 boxes. So that takes a while.
Well, and especially if it's one of those where it's not right at the curb,
Oh,
if you got some walking to do, 50 boxes takes a long time.
Yeah, or stairs. We have some job sites with stairs.
I'm so sorry to hear that. Or maybe I should say, what are you thinking?
Yeah, well, we're beggars can't be choosers in San Francisco. For a long time, the biggest obstacle to us expanding our CSA was finding enough drop sites, because real estate is hard to come by in San Francisco, and just because you live in an apartment or even a house doesn't mean you've got any place that's appropriate to put even 10 CSA boxes. Has to be relatively safe. Obviously, you can't just pile them on the sidewalk because people steal them. And it has to be shady. San Francisco, not so much of an issue, but if you get afternoon sun on the CSA boxes, even in San Francisco, you can cook a lot of produce. So we have a list of requirements for our drop sites, and a lot of places there's just not, and we've never had more drop sites than we need. Let me put it that way. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about how your CSA is structured. I know a lot of folks out west are doing like a month to month sales. Are you guys following that same model?
We are, and it's even worse than that, because we basically let people take weeks off whenever they want to. So at any given time, I haven't looked lately, but I think we still have 1,200 paid subscribers, but we're only delivering 900 to 950 boxes a week, which means that any given week, a quarter of our customers are taking the week off. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's, but this is California, and people can walk into, you can't, it's hard to avoid produce in California these days. Like, you walk down the street, there's a farmer's market. You walk into the store, and there's a giant display of beautiful produce. You go into a restaurant, everything's local. So Californians are super spoiled about produce, as opposed to people in a lot of places of the country. And really, listening to some of your other shows, I'm very much aware of that as I'm listening to people talk about doing a CSA in another part of the country, because people have really high standards here, and it makes doing a CSA harder. It does.
So the day that we're doing this interview actually happens to be the day I found out that Trauger Grow passed away yesterday. And, Trauger Grow wrote a book back in 1990 called Farms of Tomorrow that I think was very influential about the early thinking around CSAs, and very different than a lot of the models that we're doing now. I'm curious in with your CSA, what are you guys doing that makes you stand out, that gives you a marketing edge, or helps to build that community aspect that I think is so important with the CSA?
Well, it's tough. For a while for a long time, we didn't have to do anything. We had a waiting list for our CSA for years. And we were just in kind of, balls to the wall, keep up with production mode. We were expanding our acreage, planting fruit trees to try to respond to people's requests for, I've never been a big fan of buying in stuff for the CSA, although, that's a whole nother subject at this point in time. But, we were one of the first CSAs in San Francisco, definitely not the first, because there was a couple of sort of pioneers, but our CSA kind of took off right as the interest was expanding, and we really benefited from that a lot. And so we didn't have to do much to market our CSA. And, I've been doing a CSA newsletter for 20 years, and I have some really loyal readers, and we have some really loyal, awesome subscribers. And for a long time, we had more demand than we could supply just from word of mouth. Up until, like I said, 2008, we had like 150 people on a wait list. So, and then it started to turn around, and so we haven't really addressed that. We've kind of been backfilling, just trying to keep all the numbers up. We've been backfilling by growing more for wholesale, to tell you the truth, and we're running into a wall on that because of because of the cost of labor here is going up, is being legislated up dramatically, and so it's becoming even harder to compete on the wholesale front. So we other than the newsletter, we do a once a year event. There's a lot of farms that are doing events all the time now. We still don't have time to do that. We are a pretty serious production farm, and we're not big enough that we can do, like some of the sort of fake CSA farms, I call them, actually have events at their farm every weekend now, and they have somebody on staff who that's just their job to
Wow.
to do the weekend event for their customers. We have our customers up at the farm once a year. It's usually we also cap that because one year we had 600 people show up, and the highway patrol shut us down because we caused a traffic jam at the entrance to the farm. So we cap it now at 375 people, but it's a huge. It's a huge event. Just planning the parking is a big job, and making sure that there's enough stuff for people to do, and then actually trying to get around and say hi to everybody, because that's what they're there for, right? They're there to meet you. So that's a very long answer. My way of saying I don't know. Yeah.
That's a fair answer. How are you guys managing your CSA membership then? I mean, if you've got people signing up for a month at a time and then taking off on vacation and trying to keep track of all that and across your 25 different delivery sites, how are you making all that work?
Well, we use Farmigo, the software to help us manage the CSA. We don't get massive fluctuation, and we don't get people joining and quitting all the time, because we don't do promotions. We're not doing like there's people out here that are doing Groupon, where you get 2 weeks free, and I mean that's like a guaranteed way to get a lot of churn in your CSA, right? Because you get people who have no intention of
Right.
of sticking around. They just want the free boxes, and so we don't do that. Our numbers don't go up and down dramatically. They sort of ebb and flow. It's pretty predictable. We always get our numbers always jump up in January, which is not the worst time of year for that to happen, but pretty close to the worst time for it to happen, because our winter season it's limited what we have available, although obviously not compared to some other places in the country.
Yeah, let's talk about limited in January.
But we have 2013 we had a freeze in December. It was 17 degrees for 3 nights in a row, and we lost all of our citrus, all of our brassicas, all of our leafy greens, all of our beet tops. And so all we had to put in the CSA boxes was stuff we had managed to pick before the freeze, because they did tell us it was coming. And storage crops, including carrots, which were in the ground, and storage leeks and carrots that were digging out of the ground. But then our storage crops, potatoes, winter squash, and sweet potatoes, nuts, and things like that. And meanwhile, we got 150 new subscribers on January 7th. And we're like, great, this is really good timing. Just because you can grow something here doesn't mean you should. I mean, even the things that work here in the wintertime only work 9 out of 10 years. We have crops that get, in really wet years, we get disease issues and we'll lose, certain crops. And then there's freezes as well.
So something interesting that I saw when I was thumbing through the pictures on your site is you guys actually divide your CSA boxes into 4 separate compartments.
When we're packing melons in the boxes, we do that because the melons roll around and squash other things.
So that's not a constant thing that's happening with those. That's only during melon season.
Yeah, when we have melons and peaches and tomatoes in the box at the same time, which is right now, that's what we do to avoid a lot of refunds. Well, yeah, then I just brought up another thing that, maybe real CSAs don't do. But yeah, somebody gets a squash bag of tomatoes or a squash bag of peaches, and they very nicely tell us that they're very sad and they wonder if they can have a credit. And so we do issue credits for produce that is damaged in transit.
Kind of a constant ongoing management process with your CSA members.
It's only ongoing if we screw something up.
The dividers, it looked like in the picture that basically it's 2 pieces of cardboard running diagonally in the interior of the box. Is that something you purchased, or is that something you guys are jimmying up on your own?
No, they're melon box dividers. It's actually it's a standard industry standard thing for cantaloupes and other melons. They call it a star, but it's not a star. It's actually a folding. It's a square, and it folds in on the corners. And so you can fold it into a 90, or you can have it open into a square, or you can make it straight and sort of wedge it between things. And depending on what we're doing, we use it in different ways. Yeah, so we buy those.
So you mentioned growing in the winter and some of the challenges that brings with your location, because you guys have a really dry season in the summertime, and then a really and is it a really wet season in the winter, or are you guys still out there actually doing farming in the wintertime?
Oh no, we're farming all winter. We harvest 50 weeks of the year. We take off the week before, the week of Christmas and the week of New Year's. Farming in the winter here. I'm from New York. Actually, I never farmed. Well, I worked on a farm in Pennsylvania, but not a vegetable farm. And so farming in the winter here is more like farming in the summer back there, in that we can't get into the fields when it's raining. It definitely, we have our soil here is, when it gets wet, we have to let it dry out for a few days to a week before we can work it. So we do harvest in the rain when we have to. We try to work around the weather events so that we don't harvest in the rain that often, especially if it's a real downpour. It's sort of unpleasant working environment. It also screws up the soil. The crops don't look so great when they're covered in mud. It's a lot more work to wash them. But so we kind of have this scramble where, we'll sort of be doing our thing for a week or two in the winter, and it's damp, and cool, but not raining. And then we'll get the forecast for a storm, and we'll sort of go into scramble mode where we'll try to get everything harvested that we need for a few days. And because the stuff we're growing that time of year is less perishable than what we're growing in the summer. Let's just put it that way. So, in the wintertime, we grow brassicas, salad greens, carrots, leeks, even citrus. You can't pick citrus when it's raining, because if you put it in the cooler when it's soaking wet, it molds almost instantly. So we have to let the citrus dry. But so if we have a week of rain coming, we send, a double-sized crew out to the citrus to pick as much citrus as possible before the rain gets there. And same thing with whatever other crops are either the farthest from a gravel road or the crops that are the hardest to harvest in the rain. So, and then the same thing goes with planting. We plant all the way up until the first week of December, and then we start planting again in January. The the shorter the days are, the less we can actually successfully plant. So, in the sort of depth of winter, we can only plant a few things. We plant spinach and beets, and carrots. We transplant onions. That's about it. And but because you never know when it's going to dry out again once it starts raining, I'm sure you're familiar with this process as anybody who works someplace where farms where it rains. You try to get as much done as you can before it rains because you don't know when it's going to dry out again. And you're cultivating, you're prepping ground, you're planting. There's a big list of stuff that we try to do in between rains because from a production perspective, there's not much that you can do when it rains. I'm a skier, and we're 2 hours from Tahoe here, so I'll tend to work a whole bunch, and then when it starts raining here, it means it's snowing in Tahoe, so that I can go skiing for a day or two.
You earn your time off that way, right?
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about what production looks like on your 150 acres of vegetables then. What kinds of systems are you guys using let's just start with tillage and kind of work from there.
Okay. Basically, where I would start is with cover crops, because we try to do as much cover cropping as we can. Our acreage, one of the reasons that we do as much acreage as we do is to try to do as much cover cropping as possible. And so we'll often start with a cover crop that's grazed down by sheep. And we do a semi-permanent bed system. So we have a bed renovating tool that we run on a 110 horsepower tractor. It's got ripping shanks and a tandem disc gang and a roller in the back. And we can run that thing in about 5 to 7 miles an hour. It does just one 60-inch bed at a time, but 2 passes, and then we roll the field with a ring roller, and then we're ready to pre-irrigate for whatever crop is going to go in there. In the wintertime, we try to get that done before the rain. We get the rain to pre-irrigate for us. And then we do our final tillage pass with a rotary harrow, power harrow, which is really a wonderful tool for organic farmers. You get a nice flush of weeds on your beds, and then you hit the beds with the power harrow, which instead of spinning, it doesn't bring up any soil like a rototiller does. It mixes the soil instead, but it does the same job of killing the weeds and makes a nice seed bed, whether you're transplanting or direct seeding. So that's our program right there. I've really tried to reduce our diesel consumption, and also how long it takes us to get stuff done. I like getting things done quick. I'm a New Yorker.
Yeah. You said 60-inch beds. Is that a 60-inch bed top, or is that wheel center to wheel center?
Wheel center to wheel center. And we actually do now a lot of our planting on 3 60-inch beds. We transplant a lot of our crops 3 beds at a time. The power harrow that we have is 15 feet wide, so we do 3 center to center 60-inch beds, and then we follow through with cultivating 3 beds at a time. And that's something that I picked up from watching the processing tomato growers in this area. Just looking at the equipment they're using. One way that we've benefited from the conversion of a lot of the row crop ground in this area from row crops to orchards is by being able to buy equipment at auction that we never would have been able to afford otherwise. So I've gotten some really nice cultivation equipment, and that speeds things up. Means you have less tractors working, less, you have to train fewer tractor drivers. And for us, the transplanting, especially when we're transplanting in the summer and fall, for example, we start transplanting leeks in June, and it can be, as I mentioned earlier, it can be 105, 106 degrees in June. And so we have about a 3-hour window to transplant. So we start at 6 in the morning, and we need to be done by 9. so that we can get those transplants irrigated before it gets really hot. So doing 3 beds at a time with that really helps us knock out the transplants.
So when you're cultivating 3 beds at a time, what kind of equipment are you doing that with? Because obviously you're not set up on in my area here in the upper Midwest, most of the cultivating's done with belly mounted equipment.
Yep.
That must not be the case where you are.
No, we use rear 3-point mounted toolbars, and the toolbar system in California is really pretty prevalent out here. It's all based on 2 1/4. They call them diamond bars, but it's just a square tube that's offset, and it has, and you run clamps on those toolbars that accept either a 3/4 inch diameter or 3/4 inch wide shank or a 5/8 inch wide shank, and those shanks are also sort of universal. They have 2 holes in the bottom, and you can bolt either sweeps or they call them banana knives to cultivate the sides of the furrows, or you can put Alabama sweeps, all the different cultivating tools. And the whole thing is totally adjustable because the bars, the clamps slide along the bars, and there's 2 bolts that hold the clamp onto the toolbar and 1 bolt that holds the shank onto the clamp. And so it's all really easy to adjust and move stuff around. When you're doing a 15-foot setup, it can still be a lot of adjustment. So we try to set the cultivators up at the start of the season for one or another crop, and then sort of leave it that way through the season. And when the season for that crop changes, we might change the cultivator around. But those things are scalable. I mean, you can go. We have cultivators like that are set up at just 1 bed that just do 1 bed, but everything's behind the tractor. We don't do anything with belly bars.
So how are you guiding that equipment? Do you have somebody back there steering it, or is your tractor driver just looking over his shoulder all the time? How does that work?
Well, you try to start out with straight beds, and the guidance system is one of 2 things primarily. There's they call them sled runners, that they're depth control, but they also follow in the bottom of the furrow, and they're usually 3 or 4 feet long. So they go back behind the tractor tire about 3 feet back into the furrow, so they keep the sled from moving around too much. And then there's these things called cone wheels, which are 2-foot diameter cone-shaped discs that sort of hug the sides of the bed and keep the cultivator from moving back and forth too much.
And so are you dealing with laser leveled fields in your acreage?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're obviously not farming on the contour and doing kind of the crazy things like that.
Nope. But we don't only have laser leveled fields. In fact, we started out with didn't have any. And so, this stuff works for sloping fields. It works better if you're not contour. Well, no one does contours in California. Everything's straight lines, whether it's an orchard or a big tomato field or even the small farmers. Everybody's pretty much doing straight lines.
And part of that's because you're flat enough that that's not an issue, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That sounds like a qualified guess, but
well, I mean, there's places. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to the Eco Farm conference down in Monterey. That area in Watsonville, they grow a ton of strawberries there on beds on slopes that are just as steep as anything anybody's got in the Midwest or back east, and they're doing it that way too.
What kind of seeding technology are you using on this sort of an acreage?
We have a Matermac air planter for our large seeded stuff, for our melons, cucumbers, winter squash, summer squash, corn, and sweet corn. And then we use stand hay for carrots, beets, spinach, lettuce, arugula, kale.
With the punched belts.
Yep.
For those crops.
Old school
okay.
stand hay, yeah. Yep. I got a big old toolbox full of full of stand handbells. We do three rows on a 60-inch bed of all those crops, all the crops I just listed.
And then when it comes time to do your harvesting, is that something that I mean, obviously a lot of it's done by hand because it's fresh market vegetables. Yep. But have you guys mechanized some of your harvest?
We have a Pixall bean harvester for a similar reason that I've heard other people say on your show. You know, green bean subscribers want green beans in their boxes, but in the middle of summer we just don't have enough people or time to harvest 1,000 pounds of green beans, for our subscribers. So, and I like growing green beans as a rotation crop and sort of as a semi cover crop. So we do grow green beans. We do harvest them mechanically, and then we have a mechanical potato digger that we also use for sweet potatoes. But other than that, we're, as big as 150 acres sounds, the reality of our farm is because we farm all year round, we do numerous successions on a not huge scale. So an example would be something like spinach. We grow a half acre to an acre of spinach planted every 2 weeks for 30 weeks out of the year. So that spinach we're growing 30 acres of spinach every year. It gets rotated all over the farm, but we're never harvesting, acres and acres at a time. So we could never justify having a spinach harvester, for example. Like if, even someplace in the Midwest where your season's shorter, if you were doing 5 acres of spinach every week, you could probably justify having that. But most of our crops, we're harvesting an acre or less per week of each crop. And, to amortize a piece of machinery, it's kind of hard to make that pencil out. And then, so one of the things we do use to make our harvest efficient, and I don't know if this is something that's available anyplace else in the country, but we use what's called macro bins. There's different sizes, but the ones we use are pallet sized, and they're 3.5 to 4 feet deep. They're a pallet footprint. And they're made out of plastic. They're vented, where you can also get solid ones. We use those for half the crops we grow, and there's trailers that they fit on. These sort of they fit 4 bins on a trailer. You can tow them behind a truck. You can tow them behind a tractor. They tilt, and the bins roll off the back, so you can roll up to your packing shed, pop the pin out, and then drive forward, and the whole thing tilts up, and the bins just roll off the back. And so we use those things all the time, and we have hundreds of them. So we use those for everything from leafy greens and beets to in the wintertime, and citrus and carrots to we harvest our onions and garlic into them in the early summer, and then we harvest melons and watermelons into them. We harvest winter squash into them. So that's our kind of our harvest efficiency there. And we do have a couple of platforms, 3-point. They're just old truck flatbeds that mount on a 3-point hitch, and we can drive the tractor through the field when we're harvesting something like tomatoes, our determinate tomatoes. When we can't throw something into a bin, we're using that harvest platform. So people will put their boxes onto the platform as they're going through the field instead of walking stuff all the way out.
And then with the macro bins, people aren't harvesting directly into those with a crop like spinach, I would imagine. They're harvesting to another container and then pouring that into the bin.
Correct. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And then we're also washing the spinach we put a liner in it, and we wash the spinach and fill the bin up, take the bin to the packing shed. And when it's time to pack our CSA boxes, half the packing stations around that roller conveyor are bins full of stuff. And people are just pulling the washed produce directly out of those bins and putting it into the boxes. So like carrots or potatoes, things like that. So we use them at every stage of the process. They're as opposed to, for example, like having a harvest belt for broccoli, which I honestly would love to have one of those, but it would sit around for most of the year, whereas our macro bins are never sitting around. Our only issue with the macro bins is when we run out of them, and I get a call from Victor, from our harvest manager, saying, we're out of bins. They're all full. They're all being used, or they're all full of something. And we know we're getting our money's worth out of them.
So with that, Paul, I'd like to stop here, take a break, get a word from our sponsors, and then we'll be right back with Paul Underhill from Terra Firma Farm out in Winters, California.
All righty.
The Farmer to Farmer podcast is made possible with the generous support of Vermont Compost Company, makers of Fort V and Fort Light potting mixes for certified organic transplant production. And while it's hard to start thinking now about next year's potting soil in the middle of the current season, you don't want to miss participating in Vermont Compost Company's fall pre-buy program. When you order Vermont Compost potting soil for next year's growing season, you can save significantly on the finest potting soil that I personally have ever used. There are many great options for significant savings. Vermont Compost Company organizes shared truckload weeks when they organize and group orders by state or region. When you place your order to ship on one of these shared truckloads, they offer discounts on the purchase of your potting soil. Plus, they consolidate the orders so growers also save on shipping fees. Now, if you want to get the best possible deal on Vermont Compost potting soil, order a full truckload. If you don't need a full truckload yourself, get together with your farming friends and neighbors and order a full truckload together. This option offers the best possible price per sling bag or pallet and the best possible shipping rate. It's also the best option for growers who are a great distance away from Vermont. Growers who pre-buy full truckloads often end up paying a price for their sling bags that is lower than what growers pay for a sling bag picked up in Vermont. The fall pre-buy program runs September 21st to December 21st. For more information, visit the website vermontcompost.com. Bandwidth for the Farmer to Farmer podcast is brought to you by BCS America. BCS two-wheel tractors are often mistaken for just a rototiller, but it's a truly superior piece of farming equipment. Engineered and built in Italy where small farms are a way of life, BCS tractors are built to standards of quality and durability expected of real agricultural equipment, the kind of dependability every farm needs. I've worked with BCS tractors for over 24 years, and I wouldn't consider anything else for my small tractor needs. And I'm not the only fan. More than 1.5 million people in 50 countries have discovered the advantages of owning Europe's most popular two-wheel tractor. And these really are small tractors with the kinds of features found on their four-wheeled cousins and a wide array of equipment: power harrows, rotary plows, flail mowers, snow throwers, sickle bar mowers, chippers, log splitters, and more. Check out bcsamerica.com to see photos and videos of BCS in action. bcsamerica.com. And we're back with Paul Underhill from Terra Firma Farm out in Winters, California. So, Paul, one of the things that you and I had communicated about a little bit before the show was your use of a GPS system on your farm.
Yeah. Every year I give myself a little project to work on. And on my farm, I'm the only person who marks out all the beds. Everybody else is scared to do it. And it's one of those things that it's not just a time-consuming task, but it's also a little bit nerve-wracking. We have a bunch of fields that are on county roads, and when you're bedding up a field that 20 other farmers are going to drive by every day, last thing you want to do is have a bunch of squiggles out there. But like I said earlier, the straight beds are kind of the foundation for us, from everything from tillage through transplanting and cultivation, and when our beds get screwed up, it costs us a lot of money to redo them. We disc the field down, and we kind of smooth it out. It takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. Costs a lot of money. So I was looking at the GPS for the tractors and kind of was shocked at how much bigger farmers are paying to do this, and it's what they call a lockbox system. I won't name any names, but the company that the primary company that does it, you got to pay them thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, not just to buy their technology, but then to use it. You got to keep paying them for it every year. The basic setup that you're seeing your big farm neighbors use is costing them $20,000, and then another couple $1,000s a year of subscription fees that they pay just for the privilege of continuing to use it. So when I heard about a bill was passed, our federal government passed a bill requiring all states and municipalities to make their GPS facilities available to the general public. And what that means is everybody has these base stations that are continually, broadcasting a location that an agricultural GPS unit can pick up on and do the triangulation that the ag GPS needs to get the super accuracy. Agricultural GPS is accurate to within half an inch. And the only way that they can do that, and you can't do that on your phone or on your car GPS, is because you need this second data point rather, that the three devices, the satellite, the base station, and your GPS will have to communicate to get the accuracy. So once this bill was passed, this farmer out in Nebraska, whose name I can't pronounce, Lefebvre, he built an Android app so that using a Bluetooth connection, you can buy a standard GPS unit for your tractor, which looks like a heavy-duty computer, a computer that you'd take out in your tractor, and using your phone or a tablet with a Bluetooth connection, you can connect to your town or your municipality or the local university. You can connect to their base station and get the correction data, they call it, to get your GPS to work to within a half an inch of accuracy. But prior to that, you had to buy a radio from the company, from the ag GPS company. It was $10,000. And then you had to pay them to use it, a couple $1,000s a year. So, again, it's still not cheap. The unit for your tractor costs about $700. You can get them on eBay. And then you still have to buy the software package from Trimble that they charge you another $1,500 for or something. But basically, so now for $2,000 and your cell phone, you can have the same accuracy of GPS as the guys running the 24-foot wide harvesters.
Now, is this something that you're using for steering the tractors, or is this just for bed layout?
Just for bed layout. The Autosteer, that's another X number of thousands of dollars, and I haven't budgeted for that yet. It's on my wish list, but farmers have long wish lists. Basically, the best thing about the GPS, the way that I'm doing it, it means that the little lights on the computer unit are super accurate, and you go out to the field, you just pick a line. You pick a starting line and a finish line, and you drive that line, and the computer straightens it for you, and then tells you where it is, and then you follow that same line through the whole field.
By following the dots on the computer,
by following
essentially.
The dots, That's right. And for me, I kept the guidance system on my bed machine, which is a disc an arm with a disc on it that marks a line in the dirt, right?
Right.
But of course, when you're marking out beds, you get to the end of the field, the disc arm is behind the tractor, and so wherever you stop, the line that you marked is 10 or 15, 20 feet behind you, or behind the front of the tractor. So you turn around to come back, and you've got 20 feet that you've got to sort of guess where to start again, and the unit on the tractor tells you exactly where it is. You get the green light, but that's not even the best thing about this for me is that if something happens to that field, whatever, if you have to disc it up, or say you harvest potatoes and those beds get kind of messed up, you've always got those beds in the unit, in the computer unit, the GPS unit. you enter the name of the field, you enter the width of whatever job you're doing, and it stores it in there so that 2 years, 3 years down the road, you come back to that field and you can just start right where you left off with those beds. You don't have to spend, I don't know how anybody else does it, but anytime we were starting a new field, I'd spend a couple hours out there trying to make sure marking out the bed. It's kind of a 2-person job if you have a field that's more than 100 feet long. Somebody's walking back and forth with whatever marking flags,
And then this is something then too is going to cut down on your compaction because you're always traveling in the same wheel print that you were before.
Correct.
Great. So we'll link to that, the one that we don't know how to pronounce, but lefewer.com. So, if you're out there currently steering your tractor, don't feel like you have to get that written down. We'll make sure that we've got a link on the show notes. If you want to go to farmertofarmerpodcast.com and you just search for Underhill, and that'll take you to the right page that'll have that link on it. So Paul, tell us a little bit about how you came to the farm and how you got involved to the point where you actually became a partner, and then how that whole relationship has evolved since 1993 when you came to the farm.
Okay. Yeah. I'm from New York. As I said, I was living in New York City, working for an environmental nonprofit, and I moved out to San Francisco. I got a job out in San Francisco, moved out for a job. It didn't work out. But I got to go to the Eco Farm conference in Asilomar that year as part of my job, and met some organic farmers, kind of, got excited about it. And so when I decided to leave my job, I thought, before I move back to New York, I'll go work on a farm in California. And so I started calling up farmers back in the day from CCOF. Our organic certifier had a list of farms that hired interns. And so I sort of drew a circle around San Francisco because I didn't want to move. I hardly knew anybody in California, and I didn't want to move that far from San Francisco. And so I drew a circle and visited a few farms, came up to meet Paul. And at the time he was kind of in the process of expanding from probably 10 acres to onto a new parcel that was going to make him a total of 25 acres, and he was looking for help. I had worked on a friend's farm in Pennsylvania driving a tractor, and he needed a tractor driver, so I started working for him. Back then we were all doing everything. We were Paul and I were both doing farmers markets. We did a lot of farmers markets back then. We were selling to some of the same stores we sell to now, some of the same wholesalers. And I was still spending a lot of time in San Francisco. And some friends of mine wanted to get our produce, but didn't want to go to the farmers markets we were doing, which were actually on the other side we're in the East Bay. And so I'd read about CSA, heard about CSA, some other farms were doing it. And so we started our first CSA drop site, one in San Francisco at a friend of mine's house, and another one in Berkeley at another friend's house. And that's how the CSA got started. I was working on a tractor in 1995 that I ran out of oil and burned up the engine, and Paul basically said to me, "Well, you're either fired or you have to become a partner." So I chose the partnership route. I had a little bit of cash saved from my retirement account from when I was working in New York. Gave him that to put a down payment on a new tractor, and to pay for the new engine in that tractor, and then I was a partner, and from that point on, he and I ran the farm very much the way a lot of people start small farms. We were off the farm as much as we were on the farm. We were doing 5 farmers markets a week. I was doing 2. He was doing 2. We had somebody else doing one of them. I was doing the CSA drop-offs on one day and he was doing it the other day. So, between the two of us, we were only on the farm 3 days a week each. We were on the road 3 days and on the farm 3 days. And that kept up, for 10 years, really, that we were still, as the CSA grew, we did fewer farmers markets. We would, when the CSA added another 100 boxes, we'd be like, oh, we'll get rid of this market. It's not that great anyway. We found some more land, expanded our production, expanded the CSA. And the whole thing was very organic. There wasn't much planning, but because we were right on the forefront in the area of the CSA thing, we were actually, we were doing pretty well. Our business was doing pretty well, and our accountant told us, you got to do two things. You got to incorporate, because we were paying, a ton of taxes, and you got to incorporate, and you got to buy something. We couldn't afford to buy any land. We kept trying to save up to buy land, and then we'd have to pay a bunch of taxes, because that's how farming works. You have a good year, and you send so much of your money to pay taxes that you have to borrow money the next year to just make your production in the spring. So we actually gave up on our idea of buying land in 2000, and we both bought houses in town, which our accountant was happy about. And then just a couple of years later, I was just driving down, a road that I drive down all the time, and there was a sign, a little handwritten sign saying 77 acres of land for sale. And so I drove down the road, and this guy, basically totally nuts guy, who was selling his place and wouldn't deal with any realtors. And he mostly chased anybody who came down the driveway away with a shotgun. But his wife had known Paul for a long time, because he used to sell at the Davis Farmers Market. I mean, because he was selling at the Davis Farmers Market, and she would talk to him every week. So anyway, we were able to buy that piece of land, and that was 80 acres. And so we went from farming 50 acres to 130 acres in the span of a year. And it was a big jump for us, but it seemed like an opportunity that we weren't going to have again. We actually didn't even quite have the money to make it happen. I sold my house in town, and we sort of scraped together as much as we could, but we were still short on the down payment. And so I wrote a newsletter to our subscribers talking about it and saying, we'd really like to make this happen, and if anybody can help us. And we got 12 or 14 people who offered to loan us anywhere from $500 to $5,000 each to make the down payment happen. And it was literally, we just squeaked in. And then when we approached the mortgage lender, I think we were $5,000 short or something like that. We approached the mortgage lender and told them the story, and they were so amazed that our customers were willing to loan us money that they cut the down payment requirement by $10,000 so that we could get there.
Wow.
Yep.
Well, I guess it's proof of concept. Proof that you've got a market.
Yeah, and that was an interesting experience too, because when you first go in to talk to, this was Farm Credit, and it's a very buttoned down, very conventional ag environment when I went in there the first time, but we just lucked out because our loan officer had just gotten out of school, and she, for whatever reason, she was excited about organic agriculture, and she really kind of went to bat for us on that one. And since then, that's our local Farm Credit. They've done quite a few loans to businesses like ours, to smaller farms, that don't fit all the rules that those folks have, because they've got a square box, and and you're a round peg. they're trying to fit everybody into. So it was kind of it was an educational experience going through that process.
So as a corporation and as a partnership, how do you guys engage in the decision making process?
Well, our partnership is so Hector bought into the company just before we incorporated. He approached us. He had actually he and his family had bought one of the pieces of land we were farming. We made an offer on it, and they outbid us. That was when we were before he was a partner. And so he was already one of our landlords. He's an employee, but also one of our landlords. And he approached us and said, now I want to be an owner of the farm. And so, that was exciting, really, to have a long-term employee who him and his family played such an important role in the farm already, step forward to want to do that. But he's a 20% owner, and Paul and I are 40%. And so we have a situation where we have to have two people can outvote the other person, but it's pretty rare that we do that. We tend to do things by consensus. We're all generally so overwhelmed with our own responsibilities on the farm that, and none of us, I don't think I might be a little bit more of a micromanager than either Paul or Hector, but I'm definitely not a micromanager. So as long as things are going along well in other people's departments, we don't step on each other's toes a whole lot. And the big decisions, amazingly enough, we tend to have no problem achieving consensus on that stuff. We've made a couple big decisions since we incorporated, and it's been relatively easy. So I think it's mostly just luck. The things we fight about are really stupid stuff. Really, the things that have caused us the biggest problems. The most challenging things that we've encountered have been pretty easy to manage on a partnership level. It's the little niggly stuff that we'll tend to have squabbles about, or even big fights sometimes.
Would you mind sharing an example?
Oh, yeah. Well, for the most part, we manage. We each have employees that we manage on our own, and so there isn't much. I would never tell Hector that I don't like somebody that's working for you and I think that you should fire them, for example. Or,
okay.
I might suggest to him, I have a friend who's got this, whose son or daughter is in high school and they seem like a really good person, and, is there a summer work for him in the package shed? But, that's just kind of a different thing. But but we do have office staff, and and every once in a while we'll have somebody in the office who is doing a great job for one or two partners, but not so much for the other partner. and we've had some pretty significant disagreements about that. Somebody who's really good at human resources, for example, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have a lot of people skills. And so they might be doing a fantastic job with all the reporting for workers' comp and all that stuff that has to happen in the office. But if they piss somebody off every time they go into the office to ask a question,
right.
So yeah, that's about as much of an example as I can give you without naming any names.
Fair enough. Yeah. So I know one of the things that you're going to be facing here in the next couple of years is going to be the implementation of the Food Safety Modernization Act, because clearly you guys are selling a volume of produce that is going to mean that you're going to be subject to the full force of the regulation.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about food safety and the FSMA and how you've been involved in that and how you guys are managing that going forward?
Yeah. So as I talked to you at the start, I was involved in the 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 events leading up to FSMA quite intimately, because I was on the board of directors of California Certified Organic Farmers, and we went through one after the other with the spinach E. coli outbreak, and then, or actually the almonds was the first thing that happened, and then the spinach, and then there was a pistachio salmonella outbreak. And I don't know if you remember this, but initially the ag industry just tried to blame it all on organic, and it's because of the manure. It's because of the manure. It's because of the manure. And so we were just scrambling to deal with that, and not just at the level of the media, and with our individual customers, but the organization CCOF was also dealing with regulators and trying to defend organic. And so I saw all that coming, and we had the Leafy Greens marketing agreement, which was the first thing that was sort of came out after this spinach E. coli outbreak, and there was a lot of dissension there between the conventional growers and organic growers, and so we were involved in that and trying to make sure they didn't ban the use of compost, for example, because that was talked about quite a bit. And of course, for most of us, compost is our main fertilizer. So
right.
So when the federal government sort of came to the conclusion that FSMA was going to happen, we were involved in all the drafts, in the commenting, and we were very specifically trying to make sure that they didn't take away organic farmers' tools, and not just tools. It's you got an advertiser who's a compost maker. I mean, it's like a central tenet of organic farming, right? And the first couple of times they came out with that thing, it was going to be no compost for 6 months before you grew a crop. And so,
it was insane.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And so, and then I also personally attended listening sessions about that and really pressed the FDA people, because, when you went to those things, you got the feeling like they were just trying to sweep your concerns under the rug. But, that's your only opportunity. When you go to one of those things, if you don't get on the record, the public record with that, then they don't even have to address your concerns in their considerations for the legislation. So I asked the guy point blank, because we graze sheep on our cover crops, we graze sheep on our crop residue, and also in some of our orchards. And I asked him 3 times if they were considering grazing to be an application of raw manure, because they were sort of drawing a line between compost. You're okay with compost as long as you do it 60 days before harvest, or 120 days before harvest. They were going back and forth on the numbers, but raw manure, it's 6 months. 6 months until you can harvest a vegetable. And so I asked the guy 3 times, and he finally said, he actually got kind of angry with me. He said, grazing animals on crop residue is not applying raw manure. And I was like, okay,
wow,
thank you for saying that. And it was on the public record. And now, if you look in FSMA, it's exactly, they treat it as a completely different category. It's akin to wildlife intrusion. So if some deer come through your broccoli field right before you're about to harvest, there's a whole list of things you got to do. You got to walk through the field and look for every piece of deer poop, and you got to flag the path that the deer took, and you got to measure back 25 feet and either plow that crop down or make sure it's not harvested. You got to document that you're not harvesting it. And the same thing is true with grazing. If you're grazing the animals before you plant, you're fine. If you're grazing your animals 2 fields over from where you're harvesting, and the battery dies on the electric fence, and the sheep get out on a Sunday because nobody goes out to check on them, and they get into that broccoli field, and I'm giving you an example an example that happened on our farm, and start munching on the broccoli, and everybody comes in Monday morning and they're like, the sheep are in the broccoli. Guess what? You can't harvest that broccoli field anymore.
Right.
So, but that's a really important difference.
What are some other implications that you're going to be dealing with the FSMA? What's going to have to change on your farm?
Well, the one of the main things that's going to have to change on a lot of people's farm is irrigation. And I think this is going to affect folks in other parts of the country as much or more than it affects us, because I know there's a lot of farmers. I mean, you guys back there, if you're investing in a vegetable crop, nowadays, I'm guessing most people have at least some sort of backup irrigation system if they don't get any rain during the summer. And if you're pumping out of a creek or you're pumping out of a pond, that's going to be your biggest concern, because you have to test the water and you have to pass a standard, which is not easy to figure out. You practically need a calculus degree to do the math on this thing, because it's a sort of a rolling mean of your tests. And for surface water, which is, for us, it's water that comes from the reservoir and is delivered to us by a canal. But for you guys, it would be pond or a creek or a stream. You got to do 8 tests a year, and then take this crazy rolling mean. And, if you got 5 tests that are clean and then one that's way off the charts, you might not be able to use that water in a way that it can potentially come into contact with the vegetables, which would mean, you can have drip that's subsurface, or you can have drip that's under plastic. But if you have drip that's right next to your plants, that doesn't pass the test, because an emitter comes off or something chews on it and sprays the water on your crops, and that water is dirty, and that'd be a violation of FSMA right there.
So have you guys started that testing routine already?
We have, yeah. We've the testing regime is less strict for wells. It's a lower bar that you have to do to establish that your well is pumping clean water. You don't have to test as often, and once you sort of prove a baseline, you can test it just once a year. For the surface water, we do irrigate with quite a bit of water from our local reservoir, and we were worried about that water. So far, we haven't had any problems with the tests that we've done, but it's a lot of money. It's $80 for each of those tests, and we have 7 different ranches that we're irrigating with and we have to test some of those ranches 8 times a year. Do the math on that. It's thousands of dollars a year that we're going to be spending on water testing.
Not to mention the labor that goes into it.
Sure, and it's a lot of driving. I mean, you gotta take that sample and keep it cool and get it to the testing place basically within 12 hours. Otherwise, you're risking, you have a little tiny bit of coliform in that water. If it gets a little bit too warm, that population's going to blow up, and you're really going to wish you hadn't taken that sample in, because right. it's going to cause you problems. Yep.
All right. Well, on that uplifting note, Paul,
sorry.
It's okay. That's okay. I asked the question, so we'll share the blame on that one. Let's take a turn to our lightning round. What's your favorite tool on the farm?
My favorite tool on the farm is one I mentioned, which is the power harrow. It's really the foundation of our entire weed control program, because we irrigate all of our beds 8 to 12 hours before planting. We germinate a flush of weeds and knock it down with the power harrow. And then,
hey, I want to just ask a question. Yeah. You said that you irrigate 8 to 12 hours before planting. I think you meant 8 to 12 days.
No, I'm sorry. We do an 8 to 12 hour irrigation. That is about 10 days before we plant. Correct.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is we really soak the ground. This isn't like, and we're using overhead sprinklers to do this. So we're getting the whole soil, top of the bed wet, really wet, and it has to stay wet for a couple days for you to get a good flush of weeds up. If you're going to put pipe out there and just run it for a couple hours, you might as well not have even done the work, because weeds are smart, and they know the difference between a sprinkler rain and a good solid rainstorm, and that's what you're trying to imitate. And then my other favorite tool on the farm is our plastic mulch transplanter, which we didn't talk at all about plastic mulch, and we do some plastic mulch, but I try not to do too much. But the planter is this wonderful tool. It's made by a mechanical. It doesn't move the soil at all, and it flies across the field. And you can transplant. We use it not just in plastic, but also for our bare soil when we're planting tomatoes, specifically for tomatoes, but also for other things like melons and summer squash. And you can run that thing so fast that you have to slow the tractor down to turn around at the end of the field.
Really?
Yeah. Oh yeah. You'll knock the person who's sitting on the back right off if you turn around as fast as you're driving through the field. Some of each, but it's like a Ferris wheel. It's like a giant Ferris wheel. So the planting cups come at you, and then they punch into the ground, and they split in half and open up and drop the plant in. So it's the opposite of a carousel planter. A carousel planter is spinning in a horizontal plane, and this is spinning in a vertical plane, because the planting cups are actually what penetrate the soil and plastic, if you've got the plastic there. But they move so fast that no soil is moved in the process. They open a hole and drop the plant in at the same time, and then they're up and out of there, and then the next one comes down. It's a really wonderful machine.
Very cool. And what's your favorite crop to grow?
My favorite crop to grow is cover crops. That's my favorite thing to do is planting cover crops. But I as far as cash crops, I have the two-part answer. We do one planting of fennel a year, bulb fennel, and I love growing fennel because not because of when we plant it, which is at the hottest time of summer, but because of when we harvest it. It just is this. By the time we're harvesting it, it's this big, lush, fragrant, beautiful plant that's super fast and easy to pick, and I like to eat it. People like to buy it, so I wish we could grow more of it, but it's a very short season for us in this area between the hot and cold weather. But our farm is best known for heirloom tomatoes. That's what I spend the majority of my time in the summertime doing or actually all year is planting for the crop, getting it planted, managing it through every stage. Our fertility program is all based around providing as much fertility as possible for that crop, and that crop has been a big part of the financial successes that we have had, even though they almost put us out of business a couple times too.
How did they almost put you out of business?
Oh man, I mean, by the time you start harvesting that crop, you've already spent $10,000 or $15,000 an acre. And they are very fickle about the weather, and both when they're blooming and when we're harvesting them. And so we had a year, I think it was 2006, where we had 21 days in a row where it was over 100 degrees. And when it gets really hot and stays hot, the tomatoes just start coming off the plants so fast that we can't keep up with them. And it's a macro event, happens for everybody else who's growing them too in our area. So the market gets flooded. It's a niche market. It's a market that's based on you getting a high dollar value because of how much it costs to grow. And when the market gets flooded, it's a disaster.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that year we walked away from, more than half of our 15 acres that we had planted.
Ouch.
So we lost.
Ouch.
Yeah, we easily lost, six figures on that crop that year.
Wow. And finally, if you could go back in time, tell your beginning farmer self one thing, what would it be?
Buy stock in Apple. Two things. One sort of humorous, less humorous than that. But when I first started farming, I got laid off from my job actually when I first started working, and I was on unemployment when I started working on the farm. And in retrospect, what I should have done, minimum wage back then was $4.25, which is what I was getting paid in 1993 to work for my partner, who's now my partner. In retrospect, I should have just told him that I wanted to volunteer. And although technically, of course, that's illegal, but kept getting unemployment because I would have saved up a little more money that would have come in handy later. But that's just my way of telling people. In retrospect, I think that doing something else, even if you're sure you want to farm, even if you have, even if you grew up in a farm family, and I know some people, some good friends of mine now who did, and whose parents actually made them go do something else, for 4, 5, 6, 7 years before they would let them come back on the farm to work. Not just because they wanted to be sure that they wanted to farm, but also because they wanted them to save up some money, because it's hard to save money when you're farming, and yet you need a lot of money to farm, even on a small scale. And so don't be in a rush to start your farm, especially if you're coming from especially if you have other skills that you can make some money at and save some money. So in retrospect, and then the other thing that I wish somebody had told me when I was first farming was, it has to do with employees, which is don't expect to find too many employees who are willing to work as hard as you do, because you're really setting yourself up for disappointment there, and you're just going to piss a lot of people off, and people that you need to help you. And I did that when I was first farming, and I really regret that. And then the corollary of that is, if you do find people who are willing to work hard, do everything you can to make sure they know how much you appreciate them, because we're all limited financially in how much we can pay people in agriculture, but we're not limited in our ability to tell people, thank you so much for the work you're doing, and you did a great job, and even if you screwed this up, I know you were trying hard, and I appreciate it, because that makes a huge difference at the end of the day.
Paul Underhill, thank you so much for being on the Farmer to Farmer podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Chris. It was really an honor to get to talk to you for a bit.
And likewise, thank you. All right. So wrapping things up here, I'll say again that this is episode 82 of the Farmer to Farmer podcast, and you can find the notes for this show at farmertofarmerpodcast.com by looking on the episodes page or just searching for Underhill. That's UNDERHILL. Don't forget, you can support the show by going to farmertofarmerpodcast.com/donate. Your support makes a big difference to us, whether you're providing ongoing support through our Patreon page or making a one-time donation, or making your Amazon.com purchases through our affiliate link at farmertofarmerpodcast.com/Amazon. You can bookmark that and use that anytime you go on to Amazon.com to do your shopping, and Amazon will kick back a percentage of what you purchase back to us at no extra cost to you. It all helps us keep the tractor running. Reviews and referrals are the bread and butter of our business, so if you enjoy the show, please bounce on over to iTunes or Stitcher and leave us a review. You can sign up for my email list at farmertofarmerpodcast.com. Also, I do love to get your guest suggestions. This episode is a direct result of those, so please keep them coming at farmertofarmerpodcast.com. Thank you for listening, be safe out there, and keep the tractor running.